Hello. Um, Welcome to the course that I'm going to deliver for you online. Purposeful Adult Interaction and Deployment in Continuous Provision, Enhanced Provision and Play. My name is Rachel Mortlock, and I'm delighted that you can join me today. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Because it's a recorded session, you can obviously stop the video at any time, or if you want to watch something again, or if you need to run off and make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea as part of that. There is a part in the middle about halfway through where I've got a break built in. So that might be a good place in order to stop it there, but it's completely up to you. I'd recommend, if possible, you have a piece of paper and a notebook and a pen just to write a couple of notes, because we're going to be watching some videos and it might be helpful to take some notes when you watch those. We're also going to be looking at quite a few films that come from a company called Siren Films. Siren Films produces high quality early years video for training. You can access a free 30-day sort of trial with Siren in order to be able to look at the videos after the course, or the Stronger Practice Hub will have a sign-in that you'll be able to use as well as part of that. So after you've attended this course, you can receive a copy of the PowerPoint with all of the information on it, and that has all of the links to Siren Films. So I will share my screen and we will get underway. For the purpose of the course today, we're using the flying high definition of continuous provision and enhanced provision. So their definition is: for continuous provision, a selection of carefully considered resources that are easily accessible at all times, enabling children to explore, rehearse, and consolidate learning. And for enhanced provision, a focused invitation to play based upon a knowledge or skill that requires development. This is often predetermined learning or to reactivate to the children's needs or interests. It works in addition to the continuous provision. So you might call it something else within your setting, and we're going to have a little bit of a look at that as we go through as well. So have a little bit of a think for a minute about the kind of interactions that you have with children across the day. And where do these interactions primarily take place within your setting? So you might have you might have thought about particular places where you have high quality interactions with children, or particular times. But in summary, interactions take place constantly. They're not all verbal. So how do you spend the majority of the time when you're with children in the setting? Are you teaching them, including scaffolding and modelling, and thinking very much of that definition of teaching, not as a top-down model, but all of that interaction with the children that takes place through play and activities, about how as adults we communicate and model language, how we show children what to do, how we explain and demonstrate, how we encourage them to have a go or take a turn, how we support them to explore their own ideas, how we encourage them to join in, the questioning that we might ask them, how we support them to recall something. Do you remember what happened when? As part of that, and how we provide a narrative for what they're doing when they're in their independent play as well. And in terms of when do they take place from the minute that the children arrive to the minute that they leave. And think about as well, I think, the real importance about having non-verbal, the real importance of non-verbal interactions with children. I spend quite a lot of time on buses, and I think it's really interesting when you get onto a bus and you walk up the bus and you're looking for an empty seat to sit down on. And what's the difference between the person who's smiling at you as you walk looking for that seat? You know, you feel warm, you feel, you know, it's somebody you can sit next to the person who shows by their body language that they really don't want you to be there and they really don't want you to sit there. So even as adults, that body language is really, really important in starting to build that relationship and making us feel welcome and making us feel secure as part of that. And one of the things that we often find, I think, is that a lot of the language that we use is really functional, about making sure a task is done or a routine is done. And is that what takes up our time? Or do we really have that time to tune in and talk to children? Because we know that from birth onwards, children want to interact. And that can be through words, through body language, through facial expressions, about how we smile, the songs that we sing, the care that we show, how we read a book to them, or even the way that we move. And that's right from the very first minute that we greet them. And one of the things that I like to think about is, how does each interaction that we're having enhance the experience of the child? And I've just put a little quote at the bottom of the screen from the DFE reading framework, and very much quoted in some of the Ofsted blogs as well. A language-rich environment is one in which adults talk with children throughout the day. The more the children take part in conversations, the more they will understand once they can read, and the more vocabulary and ideas they will have to draw on when they can write. So a language-rich environment isn't about having words displayed everywhere that largely children can't read. It's about that quality of that adult talk, those interactions and those conversations with children. So we're going to have a little bit of a look at this, which is a pedagogical model. So this is based on the EPI research, and I've put a link to that. It was a longitudinal study that looked at high quality early years provision across a range of early years settings, and it looked at the impact of children's learning over time. And it was then published and updated continually. It formed a lot of the background for the previous Labour government's early years policy. And it also very strongly informed the writing of the 2006 EYFS framework. So what they found when they were looking at really high quality early years provision was that what sat at the absolute centre of that, in terms of being the most important, or what sat at the core of it, was those pedagogical information, those face-to-face interactions, those interactions between adults and children, between adults and adults, and between children and adults. And then around that sits this pedagogical framing about how we develop the learning environment, about how we develop routines, about how we plan, how we assess children, how do we know what they can already do and what they need to do next. And then the importance around that, about investing in staff training, about building really strong relationships and partnerships with parents. And one of the things that they found when they looked at it was that children were interacting with either other adults or children for about 70% of their time, whilst experiencing all areas of the curriculum. One of the interesting things was they found that the interactions actually spent just over dropped when children were listening to staff read books. And we're going to have a little bit of a look about that as we go through as well. And when they were looking at the quality of those interactions, one of the things that they found, so if we're thinking about sustained shared thinking, and that's really high quality interactions, and it occurs when two or more individuals work together to solve a problem. They clarify a concept, to evaluate an activity, to extend a narrative, and both must contribute, and it develops and extends understanding. So as we go through today, we're going to look at some examples of sustained shared thinking as part of that. But there's a really interesting thing, because what they found here was that if we were looking at those interactions, what they found is that the interactions were strongest working one-to-one. And as it moved out to a bigger group, so maybe looking at a whole class in reception, then the interactions became less about that sustained shared thinking, and it moved more into looking at direct teaching, which are and into task management as well as part of that. And so it looks at monitoring, might include practitioners observing the children as part of that as well. So they'd be observing them, but they wouldn't be interacting with them. And in terms of the direct teaching, It looked at, so it might be around targeted child observations or simple questioning or description of activities or didactic instruction or task management. But if they were looking at those really high quality interactions, what they found that they were more likely to take place when groups were smaller, and as groups became larger, they reduced. So how do children learn? So if you look at this and think about the experience of the child across a session or across a day or across a week, research showed that the best outcomes for children take place where most of the activity within a child's day is a mixture of child-initiated play, actively supported by adults, and focused learning. So adults can guide the learning through playful, rich, experiential activities. So if we're thinking that children learn through play, by adults modelling, through guided learning, and by direct teaching. And what it says in the UI statutory framework is that as children grow older and move into the reception year, there should be a greater focus on teaching the essential skills and knowledge in the specific areas of learning. So if we look at this diagram and consider this, that there may be times when children have unstructured play without adult support. Now, actually, we've already designed the learning environment in which children play. So there already has been an element of adult support in terms of that. But if we're looking on the green part of the diagram in the centre, so adult child-initiated play, adult support for an enabling environment and sensitive interaction and focused learning, adult guided playful experiential activities. So even where something is a focused activity, it can still be playful within it. And then it moves on to highly structured, where there will be adult directed with little or no play. And it's going back to what I talked about at the beginning, that sort of definition of teaching taken here from the Ofsted handbook, but it talks about showing, explaining, demonstrating, exploring ideas, questioning and recalling. It definitely isn't that top-down model of adult teaching as part of that. And if we have too little support, it can limit children, and the learning can become really repetitive and low level. And I'm sure if you have a think about it, you can probably think about children within your setting who will go to a familiar activity and they will repeatedly do that activity. And that can absolutely have some value in it. And revisiting can be really powerful. And it can have some value in terms of their learning. But there is a risk that children go and do that same low-level activity and they don't think about how that learning can be extended. So that's where that adult support for an enabling environment becomes really important as that. So the skill is to organise the adults, the space, the activities and the routine to provide a combination of these things. So looking at this balance of this unstructured child-initiated focused learning and maybe some of the highly structured across a day or a week or a period of time for children. And a really important thing that came from that EPI research said, it's not enough to create a stimulating environment and let children play. Adults need to actively teach children. And going back to that definition of teaching that we can see at the bottom there. This is a really interesting thing. It came from Every Child a Talker, and if you have a look, you'll be able to find it online. So one of the things we talk a lot about is how can we design a really stimulating environment for children that's really, really engaging for them. And yet sometimes we need time to be quiet and we need time to plan for communication as part of this. So this is a really, really simple activity to do. One of the things that happens is because I'm an advisor, when I go and visit schools, I see I see a snapshot. I don't see everything that's happening or everything that's taking place in there. So I'll go around and I'll walk around with the teacher or one of the school leaders, and we'll sort of walk and talk and comment on what we're seeing as part of that. But I'm well aware that what I see when I go into those settings is only a snapshot. And if I was to go half an hour earlier, or if I was to go half an hour later, then I may see something that's really, really different. And so when I'm talking to schools about how to plan an environment that's going to allow for those adult interactions, those really high quality adult interactions, it's really important that we manage to get to understand what's actually happening. So the suggestion in this is you actually use a heat map approach. So draw a really simple map of the setting. It doesn't need to be complicated at all. And you can do it just from memory. You don't have to do it you don't have to do it as a fresh activity, but think about the areas within the setting. And if there are areas where there's really high quality interactions and a lot of conversation and engagement, put a red mark on it. So a hot spot, if you want, in terms of that. And if you think there's areas where there maybe isn't so much conversation, mark them in blue, and then have a little bit of a consider why. If you want to do it on an ongoing basis, you can absolutely do that. You can choose a day or a period of time, or have the sort of map going across a week, and you can look at certain times during the day and do the map at those parts as well. And one of the things that it helps you to do is to consider if the learning environments are set up in a way that really encourages communication and talk. And I'm going to give you an example from a school that I've been doing some work with. So they have quite a big nursery space. And we did some work in the summer term and went to visit. And my snapshot view initially on that, we spent probably about half an hour, 40 minutes in the nursery, the school nursery, was that in the middle, they had a really big carpet space, and they had a very large interactive whiteboard, and it had been very purposely positioned to be a big interactive whiteboard. It was quite low down. It could be used by children. I think the plan that when it was put in is that children would be using their hands. It was interactive, to be doing big artwork as part of that, or to use it for some of that that creativity and those gross motor skills. What we saw when we went in was that actually it was really interesting how it was being used. It was being used by a couple of children. There were some more children watching. There was a very definite thing about taking turns as part of this. There were quite a lot of children standing around and watching. Now, actually, sometimes children do need to watch before they join in, absolutely. But if you looked at where the majority of the children were, the majority of them were around this whiteboard, either watching what other children were doing or waiting to take a turn. And there were very few children elsewhere within the setting. And one of the things that we also saw was there was quite a lot of conflict. And there was an adult really just managing the processes around those children using that whiteboard. We had a conversation about, was that typical? And the new early years lead who came in said she wasn't sure, but she was going to do a little bit of work to look at it a little bit more. And then we also noticed that there weren't really well developed areas of provision around. They sort of, they weren't clearly defined. They flowed a little bit into each other. We also looked, there was a book area, and it was one of those sort of arc book areas, and it was really small, really low down. So it was a great space for two children to crawl into and lie on cushions reading a book. But one of the things we noticed was that adults couldn't actually get into the space. And we didn't see any adults sharing any books with children. So they went and they had a big think about their learning environment, and the early years leader carried on looking at how that whiteboard was used, how that book corner was used, how the areas of provision were used. And when I spoke to her the next time, what she said is that they'd actually made a decision to switch the whiteboard off. And the reason was, it wasn't just that it dominated within each of the sessions, it was that actually she'd noticed that over time, the children were accessing some programs that weren't so great, but she also noticed that adults were tending to use it to tell a story or to show a video story rather than to read a book to children, and that adults were also tending to use it for music sessions. And again, there's nothing wrong with either of those things, but they were wanting to develop those really high quality adult interactions. And if we think about the difference about showing a music video, which is predetermined and of a fixed length, and what happens in terms of it, and the difference between leading a music session and maybe doing some dance with children. So if we're leading the session, we can really respond to what the children are doing. We might repeat a course or a verse or a chorus as part of that. We might play and swap the words around to make it fun. We might build the child's name into the song that we're doing. We can stop and we can start. We can all choose to copy one child as part of that, or we can adapt it in terms of that. So they decided to switch the video off. They were a few lost children for a few days, I think, as part of that, who sort of came in and it wasn't there. And alongside that, they also did some work with adults about adult interaction, and they also developed some of the areas of provision. And we've been back a couple of times so far, and there is an absolute marked difference. The space is still there, but it's being used much more proactively. They're sort of children building extended block play, linking in railway tracks as part of that. The adults, there is no need anymore to have one adult just monitoring or policing, if you want, that's that whiteboard. So there's more time for adults to be out in the areas of provision, really talking to children as part of that. And actually, the children aren't missing it because they're having different opportunities. It doesn't mean that the setting won't bring it back at some point and use it, but it means it's moved it from being that focus. And there is very definitely more conversation between adults and children, and more conversation between children themselves. The next thing that we had a look at was the when I talked about the book arc. We're going to have a look at creating spaces to read with children as we go through. But one of the things that they'd also done was put a space in that was big enough for an adult to sit and share books with a couple of children. And we'll look at some examples of those as we go through. And we saw some really nice high quality language within that. And based on the last visit, there was something else that was quite interesting. They tend to play music in that setting. We had a really interesting discussion. And I would say that there's a sort of split view in terms of research on whether music is helpful or not, and whether it limits conversation. Because does it mean because there's music, you don't there isn't so much for need because the space is being filled as part of that. So one of the things that they're then going on to do their own small part of research is they're going to remove or stop playing the music for all or part of the sessions and see whether the conversation increases as a part of this. So you can use something like this heat map to do your own small quality, small research as part of that. So that's what they've done. They looked at the whiteboard, then they looked at the areas of provision, then they looked at the reading corner, and now or reading area. Now they're looking at the impact of music within that. So one of the things that I didn't say at the beginning is you're going to be sent a copy of this PowerPoint, and as well as what you can see on the screen, it has further notes and further links within it. So we create an engaging and stimulating environment, but actually it's not enough to create that environment. Going back to that research, adults have to actively teach children. And these are from a couple of different schools. It has the 2-year-old provision. They have 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old. They have one of these schools, I think, probably has 120 nursery children by the summer term, 90 reception children as well. And you might look at this and think, well, they theme. Actually, they don't theme. They don't theme their main areas of provision because they want children to be able to come back and revisit that. And if it's changing all the time, they can't do that. They might enhance it a little bit from time to time. But one of the things that they do is they create areas of linked to their theme or their focus or their topic, but they create areas that are stimulating, where they've really focused on the vocabulary and the language as part of that. And what you can't see in these, if I was to go into this setting and this had just been put in place, there would be an adult there talking to children about it. So they've thought really carefully about the images, they've thought really carefully about the vocabulary that they want children to use, and they would make sure that there was an adult there who could talk to the children about it. And as it had been there for a longer period of time, children would start to share their knowledge and talk to other children about it. But the important thing is that when they look at developing these areas of provision, these areas of stimulus, I suppose, within the classroom, that they prioritise for the period of time when it's first put in and ongoing in terms of dropping in, that opportunity to have that adult there talking to the children about that vocabulary, modelling that language in terms of that. And if you look at one of them, you can probably see it's a tray of tadpoles. And I think how often do you see tadpoles? And they just sort of sit there, and there's no real interaction between the children and the tadpoles as part of that. So the real important thing is they don't just create a stimulating environment and leave it. It's the role of the adult in terms of developing that. So we're going to have a look at the first of our videos in a minute. As I said, they come from Siren Films. There's a link here so that you can access them as part of that. And one of the things that we're going to look at in terms of that is that children don't have the same home experiences. And by the time children come to you, they will have had really different experiences. And they'll have had really different opportunities for conversation and interactions. And it's really important that we make sure that we recognise that and that we take the child from where they are on their journey as part of that. And one of the things, I was on a plane last summer, and it was a 3-hour plane journey. It's quite a long plane journey. And opposite me, a mum and dad and a little girl came. The little girl was immaculately turned out. She had a little pink rucksack, and in it she had a little water bottle, a little teddy, and some other things, which we'll talk about in a minute as part of that. And she came in and she sat with her parents, and they put her in the middle seat, and she was strapped in, and it was all fine in terms of that. Just as they were taking off, she very briefly looked at a sort of little video on her mum's phone, but without any sound on, very considerately as part of that. And then she sat there during the journey at different parts. Her parents asked her, would you like some water? Do you need the toilet? And then just as they were coming into land, they said, oh, they got her little bag out and they got a sucky lollipop out of it. And obviously, that was for her to suck so that her ears didn't pop as she was coming into land. So she was exceptionally well cared for during that journey. The adults didn't talk to her about anything else for 3 hours. And it just struck me that, you know, she might be on planes all the time. I suspect she probably wasn't, but she might be. But actually, so much is happening in terms of that. They didn't talk about the, oh, where do you think we're going? What do you think it'll be like when we get there? What can we see outside the window? What do you think's happening now? Or talking about any of the language. They weren't talking about seat heads or bulkheads or wings or pilots or cabin crew or none of that. So she was really well cared for from a functional point of view, but there was no discussion in terms of that. And it really, really struck me during that journey that actually we need to support parents as well as part of that. So we need to be able to model for parents how to talk to children, how to have those high quality interactions, and how to give those experiences. And some of these Siren films, right from babies upwards, are absolutely fantastic to share with parents to do that. So we're going to have a look at a video, and just get your pen and notepad and just make a few jottings as you go through. Look at what the practitioner does during this video. How does she interact with the children that you can see within that video, and what are your thoughts in terms of that? And some of the things that we might want to see if we're looking at supporting children who need help more is about making the question concrete, so asking them about something that's real, about relating it to their personal experiences, about talking about recent events or objects, about prioritizing familiar vocabulary, but also starting to teach them new vocabulary, about providing a narrative for what's happening, and about commenting on what's happening. So we're going to go into the video now and have a look at it.
Okay, pick your fork up. Pick your fork up, right? Can you see it cutting? Have a go like that, just like when we got the soil. And again, into a smaller piece. In and put it. Well done. Fantastic. That's brilliant. That's how you do it, just like that. That's a big spoon, isn't it? Yeah. Do you think it's the right spoon for carrots? Yes. No, should we try a different spoon? We just try a smaller spoon. Try that? Can I just take that out of the way? Better. So what about you? What have you been up to, Jude, this morning?
I just go by the beach. I just go talk up on the beach.
In the beach? What did you do in the beach?
I just stand sand in the water.
Where did you get in the water from in the garden? I didn't, was there no water in the garden?
Because it's so wet.
So wet, is it? Sand or wet? I saw some children getting some water from the corner over there. Don't know what that thing is over there. In the corner beside the cabin.
Yes, I've been watching that thing.
A water tank. Is that what it is? How does the water get into the water tank? That wasn't there before we went on holiday, was it? From the pipe, so the water comes from the pipe into the tank. How does the water get into the pipe? I want to know how to work that one out.
It's warm. It's raining.
Oh, right, so the rain comes down, goes in the pipe. Then the pipe feeds into the tank. And then we get water from the tank when we need it. That's a really good idea. If we need lots to eat, because we've got lots to do this afternoon.
How do I?
Well done, you can't remember it.
What is it?
I don't know.
Do you not know what it is?
It's
It's cabbage. You must have had cabbage at home. You must have had cabbage in your house.
I like it when I was a baby.
You liked it when you were a baby, so why don't you like it now? My favourite vegetable, cabbage. Red rhymes with bread. Bread, brick for bread. Bread. Brenda. Brook, that's a brook, yeah. I know a brook, that's a vegetable, Brussels sprout. And then, are you sure you're finished? Right, you got to take your plate. I think you could eat a little bit more. Yeah. Jude, are you working to get some bread? Yes. And remember to hold your plate with, and scrape it with your cup. Yes. Yes, you can. Keep going while they're scraping it all off. We need all of the food off so we can put them in the dishwasher, don't we? Okay, go. Right, where's the open to go? Well done. Where does your plate go? That's where it goes. Well done. Brilliant.
So what did you notice in there? I'm going to tell you some of the things that I noticed. You might have written down different ones, some of these, or you might have written down different ones. There's an awful lot that's going on in that video. And I think every time you watch it, you notice something slightly different. I thought there was an interesting thing to begin with about the organisation. If we go back to that research that said the smaller the group, the more conversation there's going to be, or the more high quality interactions they're going to be as part of that. So they were in a small group. There were 4 children with 1 adult. The adult was actually sitting with the children. She was getting up to support them as well, but she was sitting with them. It was obviously part of a familiar routine, something that they did every day. One of the things I noticed was she did concentrate more on the two children who were at that end, and one of them in particular. I think it'd be quite interesting to know, if you saw it again, whether the children move round and she moves and she takes time to sit next to different children and focus in on them, because that can be really powerful. If we go back to that idea of we're getting those interactions when we're one-to-one, actually, it's absolutely fine to sometimes to talk to one child in more depth, and then you might talk to a different child tomorrow in more depth. When I first trained as a teacher, one of the things that I was told to do was on a Friday afternoon to write down the list of all of the children in my class, and the 6 children who came at the bottom, or the children who came at the bottom of that list, or those whose names I struggled to think about, those to be the children on which you prioritize your thinking or your time next week, because there's always children who can be those quieter children who sometimes get forgotten as part of that. I thought that she definitely treated up had different interactions with the children and used different levels of language. We saw examples of her modeling within that. We saw examples of her modeling. She modeled the language. She modeled physical things. She modeled how to cut for the children. She definitely provided a commentary about what she was doing when she was looking at supporting with the eating. She made suggestions. She had a range of open and closed questions. One of the things, she related it a lot to recent experiences, what the children had been doing this morning. She also talked to them about what they were going to do next in terms of doing this afternoon. She had some I wonder questions. I wonder what. She used familiar vocabulary with them, talking about the carrots, but she also extended some of that vocabulary, if you're talking about the Brussels sprouts as part of that, or talking about the pipe and the water tank to get children to recall as part of that. She provided a narrative for what was going on as part of that. And it was very strongly, the conversations were very strongly grounded in the children's experiences, their current experiences, their immediate past experiences, and then going back to remember at one point with what they were doing before the holidays. And I don't know whether you heard in the video, but there was also another adult in the background, and at one point she said, "Well done, you are remembering," as part of that. So all of those things are really important when we're talking to children and getting those high quality interactions. So adults joining in play. I remember I was a nursery teacher. I remember when I was a nursery teacher, I really believe in the importance of home role play, because all children have a home experience. They're not all the same and they might differ, but something that they can relate to as part of that. So we had a home role play corner, and used to go and play with the children in the home role play corner. And I used to have a great big grey coat. And so that generally meant that if I was outside playing with the children, I got to be the bear. And if I was inside, I got to be the dog. But I did sometimes get given other roles as part of that. And there was a group of children playing in the home role play. And so I approached the children and said, "Can I come and play with you?" And there was a very brief silence where one of the children said, "Yes, you can be the television." I thought, "Oh, that's an interesting one. I've not been the television before." And then another child immediately said, "And just switched off." So basically what they were telling me is that they didn't want me to come and join in with that play at that moment in time. And we know that we get it wrong all the time, but sometimes if we jump in and interact with that play, it can completely close the play down. So it's about that sensitive engagement with children. And it is what comes at the heart of this is relationships. And it's much easier when you know children. When it's people like me who go and visit all different schools and settings, it can be really, really hard sometimes to know, because I don't know the children, about when to intervene in that learning as part of that. And I'll give you an example. I was at a primary school in Birmingham, and we were walking around the early years outdoors and with me and the head teacher, and there was 3 boys, and they were playing with water play. And so they had an open drain pipe. They had those stands which allow you to sort of put the drain pipe at different angles. They had a sort of bucket at the bottom, and they were pouring water in the top, and there were some little fish that were going down the tube. So they were putting the fish in at one side, they were pouring the water, and it was driving them down into the bucket at the bottom. And then another child walked over, and he didn't have little fish. He had and brought from somewhere else in the setting, he had a really big killer whale toy, and he put the killer whale into the tube at the top, but it didn't go down. So he was a little bit sort of, well, it isn't going down, and he sort of gave it a bit of a push, and it wasn't going down. And the children tried to pour some water in. So clearly there was some problem solving needing and some interaction. At that point, so they were all sort of having a think about it. They tried to get a little bit more water. And at that point, the head teacher said to them, "Oh, count the fish. How many fish are in the bucket?" And the children just looked at him, because it wasn't about counting the fish in the bucket. There's times when we need to ask those closed questions like that, but it wasn't about this at this point. And so then the children went and got a bigger water container, and they tried to pour it, but the killer whale still wasn't moving. The little fish were going down and sort of going down around it. And then the head teacher then bent down to the bucket, and he picked up the fish, and he sort of said to the other children, "Look, 1, 2, 3, 4." But the children didn't engage, and there was a risk that it could have closed down the learning. Now, I went back to thinking about my O-level physics, and clearly lots of different concepts applying in this, but for me, it was something about the size of the object as opposed to the force of the water coming down it, and probably something about the angle at which the drain pipe was in. But I didn't know at that point what had to be done to get this whale to move down this tube. I didn't even know whether it was possible to get the whale to move down the tube, but I sort of had an idea it probably was. Now, there were some things that we couldn't change. That whale was not going to be changed. That killer whale was what was going to be used, because that's what the child wanted to go down the tube. So the variables in terms of that, I suppose, were the amount of water and the angle of the tube. So I think I said something to the children about, I wonder what would happen if we got a bigger bucket. So they sort of didn't take it on immediately. They had a bit of a think about it, but then they went to get a bigger bucket. And then we ended up with 2 buckets, and they were pouring it down, but they were pouring it down the tube, and the little fish were going past like mad, but the big whale still wasn't moving down the tube. And they were watching, and the owner of the whale was getting a little bit frustrated, but was okay as part of that. And after they tried lots of different things, they were stuck. And I didn't leap in. I said, I wonder what would happen if we moved the pipe. And so they had to go first. They made it put it down, which actually made it worse, because the little fish weren't moving at that point either. And then they realized that they had to raise it. So one of them said to me, would they raise it right to the top? Would I hold the pipe? So I held the pipe, they poured with the bucket, and hurrah, the whale went down the tube. But what was important as part of that, I think, was that didn't take ownership away from the children as part of that. Now, there was an interesting bit that I was now left holding the tube, and after they'd all had to go and some other children had come and joined and had to go, I was still holding the tube, and really I needed to be walking around the school head teacher. So I said to that, but I'm just a visitor. I can't stand here all day holding this. What else could you do to make it higher? And they problem solved. They went and got some community playthings, and they solved it for themselves as part of that. So what did you do as part of that? I think the importance of not jumping straight in, about taking a little bit of time to observe and finding out what they're playing and what's the intention as part of that, and what are the different tasks and roles that children are doing as part of that. To think about whether you need to enter that play and what's your purpose. I think that we did need to enter that play, because I think that it had reached a point where the children, they'd stopped problem solving for themselves as part of that. For sort of playing alongside, to asking a range of open questions, if possible, that encourage children to think. I would have said it was an example of sustained shared thinking, because we were thinking alongside together. I didn't know the answer when I started that. I didn't know what we had to do in order to get exactly what we had to do in order to get that killer whale to go down the tube. But I also thought the intervention of the head teacher, where he tried to move it into, well, actually, let's not bother getting the killer whale, let's count the fish in the bucket at the end, wasn't a helpful intervention in terms of that. So I think it's really important that we try not to direct the play to our own learning objectives or an assessment agenda, but be alert to the qualities of play and to the knowledge and skills that children are learning and applying. And just like me, when I was the switched off TV, if your presence impedes, then you have to back away gracefully. Take yourself out of that play if it's not the appropriate time for you to be in there. I think it's really important to think about everyday routines and the power of everyday conversations. And right from the minute, thinking about how do you greet children when they come into the classroom, or when you go out to meet them, or when they're hanging up their coats. You know, are you using those small amounts of time to have those to warm and welcoming body language, getting down to the level at which children are, talking to children, and thinking about that past experiences, harnessing that power of everyday conversations. Think about what you know about children. Do you know something, a small number of individual facts about every child in your class or in your group? That might be the name of their brother, the name of their dog, where they like to go with their grandma, whether they love dinosaurs or unicorns or Romans, or, you know, what is it that really engages and interests them? And being able to have those short one-to-one conversations with children. And again, it might be that you choose a number of children each day to have those, because some interactions can be planned, but most are minute by minute responses. And it's about making time when you're thinking about the routines and organisation to enable adults to talk to children, and valuing adults talking to children and having that interaction and that conversation as much as you value adults sitting down and doing a maths activity with children, for example. And building blocks of time to enable those conversations, and thinking about how you can build it into daily routines. So when the children might be going to wash their hands before lunch, is it just really transactional? You know, get into the toilet, because it's quite often supervised by an adult, particularly when they're younger children. But is it just, you know, they're in a short line, they're lining up, they're going in, wash your hands, come out, blah, blah, blah. Or are you using that opportunity to have conversations with children about maybe the things they've just done, or the things that engage them as part of that? And another thing to think about is how you organise to allow times for small group conversations or smaller circle times, rather than always having the whole class. One of the things that I've done recently, working with another school as well, was that they, in their reception classes, they would traditionally, they would have numerous stories read aloud to the class at different points during the day, but it would be one adult, usually the teacher, to be honest, reading aloud with the book to the group of 30. But going back to that idea that if we want better conversations and better interactions, we need to have smaller groups. They've looked at different ways of organising that. So some days they might split into two groups with their TA leading one of the groups, and they might be two equal groups reading the same book. But actually, sometimes it might be one adult, and that might be the teacher, or it might be the support member of staff, and they might just have 4 children, or even 2 children, or maybe sometimes even 1 child. So smaller groups to really allow to focus in and to talk about that book and to think about that. So think about those routines of the day and how they really enable that high quality talk, and go back to that idea, one-to-one, small group building up, and the better quality of interactions take place when groups are smaller. So how, within a really busy environment and having lots of children and often limited adults, how do we manage to build in those opportunities for those really high quality interactions? This is from a school that I work with. They were part of a project during lockdown, actually, funded by the DFE, looking at developing a whole school reading culture. And actually, it didn't then roll out, but a lot of the research and what was done as part of that went into the DFE reading framework when it was published. So one of the things that they really focused in on was the difference between reading, telling stories to children, or whole class stories, reading that whole class book, and really reading with children. So the difference between reading to children and reading with children. And we're going to look at an example as part of that in terms of video in a minute. But one of the things that they wanted to do was create areas where adults could share books with children. So this one is one of their reception classes. So if you can see, they've got a bench in, and this bench is big enough for an adult to sit on with 1 or 2 children as part of that. They've got their books here, and these are the books in the basket at the front of the books that came up from nursery with the children, and the books on the shelf are a focus on their core texts, which they come and revisit across the course of the year. The big focus on traditional tales has quite high numbers of children with English as an additional language at this school, and so some of the parents wouldn't be so familiar. They've got a puppet, a teddy to read a book to. They've got some little characters that go with some of the books as part of that, and you can also see that the children vote when they come in about which book it is they're going to read today, and the book that which is going to be read to them as a whole class, usually at the end of the day. So, and the book that isn't voted for stays there, and another book comes in and joins as part of that. So it's very purposeful in terms of that. It's very uncluttered. It's a quiet area. It's sort of tucked away. It's not near the busy sand or the water. And it's become very much a favourite area in the classroom for children. And it's a real focus on conversation. And it enables that dialogic book talk. So that group activity in which children and adults together developed a shared understanding of a book through talking about it. So they're talking about that book. They're developing their language for thinking. They're making connections to things they already know. They're asking questions about the book. They're exploring the book at different levels and really getting into that conversation about it. We're going to have another look at one of the Siren film videos now. Moving on. So again, the same thing. Make some notes, jottings for yourself while you're doing it. What do you notice in terms of the adults and the children, and what's happening when you watch this video?
Look at all the pieces
It's a
of the egg.
baby crocodile.
A baby crocodile. Oh, look. The animals are so scared.
They're so scared. It's
Well,
so little.
It is really little, isn't it? But it's a crocodile. So I think they're worried. It has really sharp teeth that might bite them.
They want to buy them, but soon.
Yeah, it's a teeny tiny little crocodile.
Look how little I am. Big.
You're tall, aren't
I'm
you?
barely up to there.
You're getting taller every day.
Yeah, that's
You
how.
can see the lights. You're
I'm-
4 now.
I'm barely up to there.
Growing taller every day.
You're tall up to there. Let me see how
Okay,
tall
let's
you
see
are.
how tall I am.
You're tall. I'm barely up in there.
Taller than me. Oh.
You're up to
Almost up to my elbows. Yeah.
Have you ever had pasta with a rhinoceros in it?
Rhinoceros in it? No, never had that before. Never had that. That sounds funny.
It's
Yummy in your tummy. Look at all the animals running away.
had a hippopotamus in the tummy would be like next
Would, wouldn't it?
Your flight is slow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, big crocodile.
1, 2, 3. They're both big.
I think I can see another one. 8. Oh. 9 and 10. Yeah, 10 fish. Yeah, that one's hiding, isn't it?
I
It's going behind.
want to be on the water.
So what did you notice when you looked at that video? I'll tell you some of the things that I noticed. First of all, there was time and there was space. So there was a space in which an adult could sit down with one child or with a small number of children and share a book. You could see that I think the book had been chosen from a book corner. We don't know whether the child was familiar with that text or not. I suspect they probably were. What was interesting was that the adult wasn't reading the story to the child. They were looking at the pictures and they were talking about the book and they were relating that. It was very much child-led in terms of that. So they let the child lead the agenda. So when the child stood up and talked about the adult stood up with them when they were looking at the height as part of that. When the child started counting the crocodiles, the adult followed the lead and then started counting the fish as part of that. I think that there was some really nice interaction and some really nice response. So yummy in your tummy as part of that. So very, very much child-led, not dominated by the adult responding to what the child was saying and scaffolding and taking it further as part of that, but letting the child lead within that environment that was really, really supporting that in terms of it. So thinking about tuning into children, really. So one of the things that some further research by the same team who did the API research said was that there's an increasing recognition that the relationship a child has with the teacher and caregiver when it's sensitive and stimulating is central and the most critical component of early care and education. And I think in the videos that we've seen so far, we've really seen that. We've seen adults with children who had really, really positive relationships with those children, and about knowing those children really well, almost a meeting of minds, or being able to tune into those children really well. And I think that what we've also seen in those videos is that real importance, not just of what the adult's saying, but about how they're reacting. So actually, when she stood up, when she pointed to her elbow, or talked about her elbow, she was affirming to the child that all of those things were the right thing to do. Lots of smiling, lots of positive reinforcement as part of that. And about watching that child's non-verbal communication and responding to it. And we saw some of that in the first video, I think, about the lunchtime as well. About listening to what the child was saying and responding to that, about thinking about things, about smiling, about eye contact, copying the action, standing up when the child stood up as part of that, nodding and showing agreement. We saw getting down to child level. I don't know whether you saw she was down at the level of the child when as part of that. The tone of voice, you know, a really encouraging tone of voice that said, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in what you're doing, showing that genuine interest. So what we have as part of that is the importance not just of words, but of the body language and of the facial expressions. I've put in now to have a break. You don't have to have a break here, but if you want to stop the video and make a cup of tea and coffee, it would be a good time. The reason for that is we're going straight into another video after this, and it is the longest of the videos that we're going to watch. So if you want to switch off and have a break, do that now and restart the video. If you don't, we'll continue on, and we'll go in to look at the next one as part of this. So this is another video from Siren Films. It's about rolling eggs. And this is what they say to look at as part of this. So it says to look at the cues. What cues can you see to show that to show what the children are interested in? So look for non-verbal and verbal body language as well as spoken language. Think about how are the children learning and about how this adult-led activity supports the children's learning. And it is an adult-led activity. It's so I'll play it for you. It's the same thing. Make some notes as we go through about what do you notice in terms of this. So have a think again about the environment and how it's supporting that. Have a think about what the adult is doing to get those really high quality interactions between child and between adult and child.
Fantastic. Well done. Pop it in there. That's it. Wait, you want to have a go, do you, Kane? That's it. And you watch it. Oh, you watch How Jamie does it, and you can have a go as well, Jacob, in a minute. Oh, rolly, where's it going to go next? Where's it going to go next? Round and round, backwards and forwards, where's it? Ooh. Yeah. Ha-ha. Happened, Jamie? What does that feel like, Jamie? Whoa! Do you think it would be easier to do on the floor or on the table? What do you reckon? On the table. That's okay. Whoa! Well done. Lovely. Do you want to put that one back in there? Wow. That's fantastic. Would you like to have another go, Karen?
Yeah.
Okay, which end would you like to choose?
No.
Great. I wonder where you're going to put that one. Quite tricky to get it out, isn't it? Mhm. What's in the pot there? Oh, it looks like water, doesn't it? But is it water or is it paint, do you think? Water and pink. Oh, right. Water and pink. Yes, I think it is. If you stir it with a fork, will it all mix in? No, that's how we made the paint. We made the paint with water and pink so that it could go on the egg. And now you can roll the egg. Well, if you break it, do you think it will still roll?
Yeah.
You think it will?
Yeah.
Well, you try it and see. Try rolling it now. Okay. Then what will happen if you break it?
You make it and eat it.
Ah, we do quite often break it and eat it if we have a boiled egg for our breakfast, don't we?
Yeah.
But would we want to eat that one, do you think?
It is that one when we got the paint off.
We'd have to get the paint off. That's true, we would. But we wouldn't eat that one because it's been rolling around in lots of the paint. And we wouldn't want to eat the paint, would we?
Like lemon that.
Well, we can make the pink and the yellow mix up, but we could have a go at doing it by rolling the egg if you want to. How can we make the egg roll?
You can put some of this on it.
Right, and then how could we make that egg roll when you put the paint on it, I wonder?
You do
Oh, Jamie's got an idea.
like that. I want it
Would
like
that fork
that.
like that? Oh, that looks lovely, doesn't it? Then you can choose where it goes, can't you?
Yeah.
So which way are you going to make the egg go next?
This way.
That way, right across the paper, up. You're going to go up to the top or down to the side?
Oh yeah.
That's to the side.
Yeah.
Yes. And put some more paint on the egg.
Yeah.
Which way round shall we do that?
Oh no.
Well, you could try it, couldn't you, and see what happens?
Okay.
Okay. Doing it very carefully, aren't you?
Yes.
Quite tricky to get that yellow off, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you put a bit more on. Oh, you'd like to have a turn, would you? Okay. Right, so what do you think to do with that now? Oh, now if you've moved it away, whoa, 2 eggs. You're painting the tray now and you're making the eggs do the painting, aren't you?
Two.
Oh, 'cause we've got that. Roll it. Roll it. But do you think they'll have a race along the hill? Do we see? Oh, which one do you think is going to get across the board first?
Lucky one.
Which one's your one?
That
That one. Okay, tip it up and see if it gets to the other end first. Oh,
Really?
it didn't win. Oh, which one won?
That one.
That one. Oh, do you think we should have another race? What about those two there? Which one's going to win there?
Did.
Your one did. Jamie, do you want to see if you can race them back again? Which one came down the hill first? That one on that side. Ah. And which one? Oh, well, you could have another race and see which one wins this time. Oh, all right. Now, Jamie, what should we do with our lovely painting? Oh, wow, what's inside? What's inside? Oh, what does it smell like to you? It is like scrambled egg, you're right. Jamie, what do you think it smells like? It is an egg. That's right. Now, it's a hard-boiled egg, that one, Kyle. Because I boiled it and I made it go hard inside so that we could roll them. So you're right, it does smell like scrambled egg, but it's a bit different from scrambled egg because it's hard-boiled. Okay?
It's a baby chicken.
Sorry?
Baby chicken.
No, there's not a baby chicken inside that one.
What's inside?
Inside, can you remember what's inside?
It's fluffy.
It's like scrambled egg. Yes, Jamie, can you remember what's inside?
Hard-boiled egg.
A hard-boiled egg and a hard-boiled egg. Shall we put it in here and I'll show you what's inside? A hard-boiled egg has got the white bit. Look, but I don't know if it'll be white because of all the paint. Okay, it's got the white bit. Do you remember another word for the white bit?
Albumin.
Albumin, that's right. That was the word we learned, wasn't it? Albumin. No, look, we're going to finish looking at this one. So what's inside the white bit, do you think? Can you remember what it's called inside the one? Can you remember, Kyle? There's the yolk inside it. Shall I show you where the yolk is, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay, I think I need to use this spoon handle to show you. Right.
Why is this?
Well, to show you the inside. Right, we're just going to look now and smell, but we're not going to eat it because it's got paint on it. So this bit here is called the yolk. Can you smell it? And this bit is called the white bit, and that's called albumin. And it's gone all hard because I cooked it in the hot.
So much to look at in that video. I'm sure you'll have written down lots of things or thought about them, but the things that struck me was, first of all, I think it comes back to time and organisation. The practitioner there was only working with a couple of children. She had a quieter space outside. I absolutely appreciate that that isn't always possible and could be really difficult to do because of the challenges of staffing within it. So what did she do in terms of that? I think that she really showed a knowledge and a respect for the children. She used eye contact. She got down to their level. She made suggestions, but she didn't do it for them. I wonder what, how, do you think, what do you reckon? She responded to their non-verbal as well as their verbal. So actually when he dropped it, when it went down onto the floor and then said, shall we do it on the floor or shall we pick it up? He picked it up and put it back. Okay, we'll put it back on the table. As part of that, she provided a commentary about what was happening, and at one point a little bit of a song. And as part of that commentary, she introduced different language. So she talked about up and down and along and side and top as part of that. She gave time and space. The video is actually edited, you can see. So actually it was a longer activity than that, looking at it. She was happy to have times where it was quieter, where there wasn't a need to have a continuous dialogue as part of that. She used the child's name, Jamie, and kept him really well engaged in that. She didn't overcorrect. I think it was quite interesting that the little boy said lello instead of yellow. So she modelled how to say yellow, but she didn't jump in and correct him all the time. She didn't jump in and rephrase what he was saying, which might have reduced his engagement in terms of that. She showed a genuine interest. When it was water, he said it's water and pink, and she got close and she bent over and she had a look and said, water and pink. She gave lots of praise in terms of that they were doing well and they were doing the right thing, particularly when he looked a little bit uncertain. I think we knew right from the beginning that egg was going to get broken. But what was interesting when it did get broken, and which takes us into the next area we're going to look at, I think, is the vocabulary that she used at that point, where those children had obviously used that vocabulary before. They talked about the egg yolk and they talked about the albumin, and she came back and used that vocabulary with the children as well. So really ambitious vocabulary to be using with children.
Well done.
Which takes me into the next one, which is about thinking about and planning for vocabulary. I don't know whether you're familiar with the work of Alex Quigley, but he talks about the 3 pillars of vocabulary teaching, about the need to have explicit vocabulary teaching. So really thinking about the vocabulary that we want children to learn as part of the activities or what it is we're engaging in as part of that. And when the DfE published the reading framework, it has within there the language that might be in place around it, or you might think about in terms of reception visit to a fire station. And I know that when I think practitioners first saw that, there was quite a sharp intake of breath, because it talked about things about blaze and heat and smoke and fumes and extinguish and accident and dangerous and helmet and gloves and visors and transparent and see-through and unbreakable and fireproof and waterproof and protective. Thermal imaging cameras, so some of the technical vocabulary that was just very specifically around thermal imaging cameras, and then it talked about personal characteristics, so brave and courageous and speedy and quick thinking. So really ambitious vocabulary. And one of the things that it also talks about in there is about going back to that start about talking about it afterwards to children. Do you remember why the firefighters have to wear special gloves? Yes, to keep their hands cold and protect them from the heat. So, you know, talking that through with the children, getting them to remember, getting them to recall what they're doing. So we have tier 1 vocabulary, where we're going to look at everyday words that are familiar to most children through conversation. And some of those will be functional words and the language that children need to survive in a setting. But I've certainly had 3-year-olds that I've taught who don't know some of those basic vocabulary, such as table, and not children with English as an additional language, because obviously it's a new level of learning for children with English as an additional language. And then we've got some of that academic vocabulary which children are likely to encounter in different contexts, so words that can mean different things. And it's really complicated, some of the words that might mean different things. So think about a leg. We have our leg, we have the leg of a table, but we also might have the leg of a journey as part of that. So that would be an example, and children need to learn that words apply and might have slightly different meanings, or might have very different meanings in different contexts. So it's really important that we plan and think about the vocabulary that we want children to learn. And then we have some of that subject-specific vocabulary. So that would be the example that we just talked about the thermal imaging camera, for example. But if we're looking at that tier 2 vocabulary, so how can we really make sure that we're using that tier 2 vocabulary so that children get to know that something like squash could mean different things. It could mean orange squash, or it could mean squashing an object, and we could squash sand, we could squash a ball, you know. So they're getting to use that language in different contexts and to start to know that it has different meanings in different contexts. So planning for that vocabulary. And going back to that idea that having language-rich classrooms isn't about sticking up words that children can't read. So this is actually from the school we looked at earlier. If you see the key vocabulary, these are just laminated pieces of A4 paper, and they write on them in a whiteboard pen, and it won't say that next week. So this is from their home role play, which they'd actually themed, and I think Goldilocks and the Three Bears had moved into it. So they were doing traditional tales. They kept the home role play because the language was really good to the children in that, but some of the characters moved in to live in their home role play, and it didn't matter if the children didn't want to play with the characters who've moved in, but that was the idea as part of it. And so the words that were written on there were the words that the teacher wanted all of the adults, the volunteers and other adults working with the children as well, to try and use with the children when they were in that area. And they have similar ones, maybe stuck in the sand or in the water, and they would change all the time. And it might be that they would choose a couple of words to focus on for a week and trying to use those. It might be that they wanted to use a particular word with a particular child. So it might be that, going back to the little boy in the thing, actually we wanted to use yellow a lot with him, and so I might just put a child's name in the word that I particularly wanted to use. It might be that a really interesting word comes up in a story, and we've gone through and explained to the children that, and we want to keep on using that vocabulary, so that might get scribbled down there as well. But it's very responsive. It's not loads of words and it's not overpowering. It's very responsive to what's actually happening in the classroom at the time. And I've put language related to resources, for example, shells such as mussel, razor, clam and whelk. I was looking after a school, 70% free school meals, that was in special measures. And one of the things that we were doing in terms of widening the curriculum for the children was trying to give them real life experiences. And it was a year 1 class, but they'd been to the seaside the day before, and they'd come back to the classroom, and it's the first time they'd been to the seaside, lots of them. The school was quite a long way from the sea. So for some of them, it would have been the first time. Some of them would have done it before, but some of them would have been the first time. And they came back the next day, and they'd collected buckets of seaweed, and they'd got loads of different shells, and they'd got some sand and some things. And the children were looking at them within in the classroom. And I went down to sit down to talk to one of the children, and I picked up a shell, and I said to them, "Oh, and what's this?" And the children said, "It's a shell." Or maybe didn't answer it that way, or I think I didn't ask them it quite that way. But anyway, we were talking about the shell, and it was a shell, absolutely, but it was a razor clam. and another one was a whelk, and another one was a cockle, and another one was a mussel. And what became apparent as I sat down and talked to the children was that nobody had used that vocabulary with them. So it's really important that we don't just talk about things as being shells, but we actually tell children what they are and use the right names for things as that, because they'd had a fantastic experience at the seaside and being in those rock pools and bringing those things back. But actually, what we've got to try and use is that really ambitious vocabulary and the correct vocabulary with children as we go through. So we're going to have a look at another video. The context of this is that there's just been some rain, I think, when the children have been outside in the outdoor area.
This morning, the sun went in and the sky was filled with clouds, and then it started to rain. The rain got heavier and heavier, and I thought I'd better take shelter. Just what happened in our garden today. It was very bright outside. The sun had come out again, and the path was steaming in the sunshine. Oh, put your hand up if you've ever seen a path steaming in the sunshine.
So true. What is the path?
That's a good question, Macy. Macy says, what does it look like when a path's steaming?
And there's like some smoke out coming out of the path.
It does. It looks like smoke's coming out of the path, but is smoke coming out of the path?
No.
What is it then? What's making it look like that? Sam.
Because it's hot.
It's hot. So what's happening to it, Billy?
I got
Oh, who thinks they know? James Little.
it's vibrating and it's coming up.
Oh, it's not vibrating. It's a brilliant word, but I'm not sure that's what's happening. It's very hot. Oh, are you thinking of a different word?
Evaporate.
Evaporating. Is that what you should have remembered? Evaporating. Good remembering. You got the v bit there, didn't you? Vibrating. It's evaporating. What does evaporating mean? What's happening to that water in the heat?
Evaporating.
Ben, what's happening to it? Lily.
The sun, from the sun, it makes it evaporate on the ground and it makes it steam.
It does. It's heating the water on the ground and making it turn into a gas, isn't it? Heating it up. And
That's
you
what I
said,
was going to
kettle.
say.
Was that exactly what you were going to say?
say?
So she came out and the path was steaming in the sunshine. It was time to say goodbye. The fairy floated gently up to the sky. And then, can you say with me, goodbye, fairy, in a whispery voice? Goodbye, fairy. I called, I hope I'll see you again. Well done.
So very briefly, what was it that she was doing there? She'd obviously familiar with the text, and she'd chosen a text that allowed her to talk about an experience that had just happened within the setting and build upon that immediate past experience of children. So going back to that concrete, talking about something that they'd had a recent experience of and were able to talk about. So she was building on that experience. She was giving children opportunities to recount and talk about what had just happened as part of that. She developed their thinking by one child's thinking, building upon another, and she used that really ambitious vocabulary with the children as part of that.
This morning,
we're going to move on a little bit to think about open or closed questions. I think that if we think about that there is open questions are those that are likely to really encourage that discussion, to promote that back and forth talk, to enable that those really high quality interactions and to move towards that sustained shared thinking. But there are times when we need to ask closed questions as well. There are times when we need to check whether something's right or wrong, or check an answer. You know, we might need to ask a child to ask how many counters there are. So a closed question as part of that. But a closed question can usually be answered with one word or a short phrase, and it has a limited range of responses as part of that. But there may be sometimes when we need those. And certainly when we're going sometimes with younger children or those who are less confident, we might ask some more closed questions and base those on their immediate experience as well. But if we're looking at those open questions, they're the ones that usually can't be answered with a yes or a no. They don't necessarily have a right or a wrong answer, and they encourage discussion. And an important thing is that when you're asking those questions, don't assume that you already know the answer. So don't go in with an agenda as part of that, but listen to the child and what they're actually saying as part of as part of it. So don't get wrapped up in your own agenda and your own thoughts to such an extent that you forget to connect with the children. And one of the things that they also looked at when they looked at some of this research going past was they noticed that actually when they looked at questions and they were thinking about the number of questions within settings, they found that predominantly open questions were a much smaller amount of questions in terms of the questions that were being asked with the children. So it's really important to think about how do we make sure that we're asking those open questions and getting those opportunities to get into that longer dialogue and discussion with children. So there's some examples of some open-ended questions, but how, what, and why? And we saw some of those certainly in the egg rolling video. I wonder what would happen if. How do you know? What else do we need? You thought you were right. Were you right? Why? You thought that. Were you right? Why? Can you tell me more about? I've been doing some work with some settings on interaction and developing adult interactions. And one of the things that they've done really successfully is they've chosen a couple of questions a week. They've put them on little cards so they're in their pocket to remind them at the beginning of the week. And they focused on those questions across to try to embed it into the practice of the practitioners. So I wonder what would happen if. And so the children also become familiar with having those questions asked and being part of that process and that thinking process as part of that. What we're aiming to do is to get into back and forth conversations and ideally to get into that back and forth conversation, we're looking at having a minimum of 4 interactions on each side. So so whether it's child to child or adult to child or adult to adult. And one of the things that I haven't said, it's really important that children see adults having those high quality conversations with each other. So adults modeling through their everyday interactions with each other, the kind of conversations that we want children to be able to have. So it's really important that adults model those interactions when they're speaking to other adults as well. But if we look at this, we're going to look at another video now. The same thing to look for, make some notes about what we're seeing. But some of the things that we're going to be looking at within this is about those back and forth conversations. So about showing an interest to sustain engagement, thinking out loud, modeling new language. Really important thing, paying close attention to what children are saying. Can really see that one in this video. Asking both open and closed questions, explaining why things are happening, helping children to articulate their ideas, and certainly going with the flow of the child, which we'll see in this one.
And this was the treasure on Silver's map. I wonder what the treasure is on yours. Should we go and find it?
I can find mine over there.
Shall we go and see what Victoria's got?
I've got the treasure.
Wow, you've got one as well.
No, we need to follow Victoria.
We're going to follow Victoria. Do you want to have a turn afterwards?
I'm
Hey,
open.
are you?
It's golden bones.
Golden bells.
Yes.
We need to find Victoria. Where did Victoria go?
I'll show you.
No, should we go? Quick. Where is she? You found your treasure. A really big treasure.
It's a real one.
A real one. What's inside of a treasure chest? You know,
Like all the treasure.
it's stuck, Harry.
Real one.
It's really stuck. So what's this? What have we got inside?
Treasure.
Treasure. What types of treasure? Oh, the treasure plate. Real. The treasure plate. What was this thing? A trophy. Good idea. Chocolate? Or what is the... What if they're not chocolate coins? What if they're real coins? Oh,
And a chocolate coin.
you prefer chocolate coins
I got a different treasure somewhere else.
somewhere else?
You can
Well,
go
I
to
think
that
we were waiting because Stella's got another treasure map and she said she was going to find some gold bones. but I don't know where they are because we've got to follow your map. Can you show us the way?
I know where they
Down the street?
No, no,
No, not down the street.
there's Treasure Street.
Where's Treasure Street? Do you know? Oh, that one on there. Do you know where it is in the garden?
This and over the river and through the cave.
Yeah.
And that's how we get
Yeah,
to the
gentle on my head, honey. Gentle. Yeah.
and that's how we get to the treasure.
Oh, do you think you can show us where to go? Perfect. We're gonna follow. Yeah. But look, Stella's all the way over there. Stella, did you find the river? Still going, we're still going. It's shot. Well, we have a look again. Let's have a look at the map now. Find from the sharks. Oh, where are the sharks? Missing.
We need to go in our pirate ship.
He's got a pirate ship.
We need to go in our pirate ship.
In our pirate ship. And we need to find
Mary,
out where the ship-
hello Mary, hello Mary.
Oh, hang on a minute. Remember, we were waiting to find Stella's golden bones. Did we find them? No. We're hiding from the shark now. So where could we go next? Shall we listen? Shall we listen to Stella and see what she's going to say? Because I think lots of us have had a turn, but we're waiting to see what the rest of Stella's map tells us. Where do we need to go?
Round the butterfly, and that's how we get to the treasure.
Oh, so we're nearly there.
Yeah.
How do we get round to the butterflies?
You need to run. You need to run.
We need to run. Where
Yeah,
do we need
and
to
you
run?
need to run across the crocodile for you.
Oh,
And then flip the shark.
are there crocodiles and sharks, Stella?
Yeah.
How do we get back to the butterflies?
You need to
You
run.
want to show us the way?
You need to
Let's
run
let,
around.
no, let Stella show us the way. Remember, it's her map. Let's see where she's going to take us.
Okay. You need to step over like this, and then.
Are we still stepping?
Oh,
Crocodile, where's the crocodile?
let me step in there.
Oh, I stepped on the crocodile. Am I okay?
Yeah.
That's close. Are we nearly there? We're nearly there.
Okay.
So children's back and forth interactions from an early age are what really form the foundations for that language. And so it's really important that we think about the number and quality of conversations that they have with their adults and with other children throughout the day. And about remembering what we've said before, that some children have less interactions at home and the quality of those interactions will be variable. So if we think about what was he doing in that video, I mean, he got down to child level. He showed a really genuine interest. Wow. He really modeled respect. He made sure he took into account the views of Stella. He made sure that other children weren't allowed to dominate as part of that, through showing that respect. He repeated what the children had said and rephrased it slightly. He asked them some what if questions. He didn't have an agenda to the play. He went with the flow and the play of the children in terms of what we saw. He really tuned in to what Stella had said. You could see he was a really active listener and she felt listened to. He checked the rules at one point. Are we still stepping as part of that? And again, what we saw within that was that there was time for children to play within that environment.
And this.
We're going to just go on to think a little bit more about sustained shared thinking. And so if we think about the so just going back to the definition I mentioned at the beginning. So it's when two or more individuals work together in an intellectual way to solve a problem, to clarify a concept, to evaluate an activity, extend a narrative, etc. It's really important that both parties must contribute to the thinking, and it must develop the and extend the understanding. And one of the things that they found, as I said, it's more likely when children were interacting one-to-one with an adult or with a couple of children, so the smaller numbers, it was more likely to happen in terms of that. So we're going to go and look at another video, which has a really good example of this in a minute. But just for this point now, just to explore it a little bit more in terms of thinking about how we develop this really. So I think it's about having an awareness of and responding to children's understanding about although both parties have to contribute, they don't have to contribute to an equal fashion or an equal extent. So actually as an adult, it might just be about putting in that scaffolding question or just making a suggestion and letting it sit there and letting children think about it a little bit more as part of that. And there isn't necessarily a fixed end or a fixed intention as part of that. And one of the things that we can also do in terms of adults is that we withdraw the support and allow children to develop their confidence as well as part of that. So actually that adult support to develop that shared thinking, we can go in and we can interact with the child for a small period of time. And then if needed, we can very gracefully step away and allow the learning to continue with the children. So the other thing that we're going to look at when we look at the next video and explore a little bit more, we're going to see some of this conversation that we've talked about, aiming for this 4 terms about keeping the conversations that support sustained shared thinking involve genuine open-ended to and fro inquiry. So if we go back to trying to get that killer whale down that tube, I didn't know the answer. I didn't know exactly what we had in order to do it. About really creative and collaborative problem solving. I think getting the advisor walking around the school to stand there holding the end of the tube was quite creative and definitely collaborative from the children, but also them coming back to finding a solution for when I wasn't going to be there in terms of putting the blocks in place. Children having the chance to elaborate, recap and review their ideas, and we'll see a little bit of that. Scaffolding children's understanding of what's being discussed. We saw a lot of that in the egg rolling video where she recapped what was happening in terms of and reflected on their understanding to help them understand it more. And she also actually used really well the strategies, I thought, of summarizing and reflecting as part of that. So we're going on to look at another video now. Again, have some thoughts about what it is you notice when you're here looking at this one. Think about the ways how we move on to that, so some of that sustained shared thinking. How does the adult support the children's learning? And I think there's a little bit here about how does the environment support the children's learning as well.
Okay, do it. Are you coming? Dining. Mother is fire. Oh, it is hot, isn't it? Nice. Are you coming? It's on fire. Feel that? You feel the floor up here. It's on fire. You know? Okay. Does feel different to me. This bit's not hot. Why is this bit not hot? Yeah. It's covered. It was wet before. Oh, and that's why it's cooler. It's not wet now. Right now. Why is it not so hot over there? It's more in the shade. This in the shade. Anything over here that's blocking the sunshine? This The wall. So the wall is stopping the sunshine getting here, and it feels colder or hotter? Colder. It's blocking the sunshine getting down to the floor here. That's why it feels colder. Do we go and see what it's like over there? Yeah, Celia's saying it's more in the shade there. What do you think about this side of the castle? We did. What do you think about this side of the castle, Stels? This bit is hot. So, why is this little bit here? Where is the sun coming through?
The castle.
It's coming from over here, and it's also coming from the wind through the window. Okay.
So, when they were doing research on quality interactions in the early years, thinking about how do we support sustained shared thinking. So having a reflection on what we saw in that video, I think that we saw that he went with the flow of the child. He used, it certainly used and extended their vocabulary. For example, he was recapping that it was wet and extended that to make a link to now it's cooler. He asked, is this in the shade? Is it blocking the sunshine as part of that? So he was certainly extending the children's thinking as part of that. He was down at their level, and he was engaging the children in that collaborative process of thinking through that problem and problem solving it. So what the research shows in terms of that, and reflecting on that in terms of all of the videos that we've seen so far, because they all have elements of this in it, is about that importance of tuning into children, about listening really carefully to what's being said and watching their body language and watching what they're doing. I think in all the videos, we've shown adults who show a real, genuine interest in children. They've given their whole attention. They turn their body to the child. They nod, they smile, they get down to their level in terms of that. About really respecting children's own decision, about inviting children to elaborate more, about recapping and often linking that recapping to the previous experiences that children have about suggesting importance of offering your own experiences for children as well. There was definitely some clarifying of ideas in terms of that, where he clarified about the sun and blocking, it had been wet, and also he clarified about it was blocking the sunshine, and that was why it felt cooler. About making suggestions but not saying we're going to do it like this, about reminding children about what they said. Oh, you said that earlier. That work, was that what we thought? About using encouragement, keeping them going. Offering an alternative viewpoint. One of the things that I should have probably pointed out when we were in that reading area and we looked at those words where they had it on the laminated sheet, and I said it was next to their home role play. And I think the question on there was something like, what would have happened if Goldilocks hadn't run away? So trying to build those into it, so adults asking children those kind of questions as well. About trying to ask those open-ended questions, about that thinking aloud and modeling what we're doing when we're thinking. And we see that all the time, and that's really important in terms of everything we do. So we might be sitting in a Play-Doh area with children, and we've got our lump of Play-Doh and we're working alongside them, and we're rolling and we're kneading and talking about what we're doing. And the idea with that we're just one step ahead of the child. We're not there constructing an amazing 3D bowl of fruit with every possible detail and or one stage ahead of where the children are, or at the same level, just talking about what we're doing, providing that language, problem solving with the children. What would happen if we do that? Oh, I wonder, as part of that, and taking it through. So having that time and that space to be able to talk to the children and model the thinking. So the final thing that we're going to have a look at is this, you might be familiar with this. It's from the Education Endowment Foundation, and they've been doing a little bit of work around early years in some of their published research. And they're looking at things that improve educational practice with a particular focus on better outcomes, but addressing disadvantage and addressing gaps as part of that. And they've done an EF guidance report called Preparing for Literacy. And if you go online, you can have a look at it. But this is one of the techniques and all of the things. So they've pulled together research, and this is what they've looked at as part of this. And it's called Shrek. And you can have a look more at it and read more information about when you find it online. But I think it's quite a good visual prompt to look at, because it reminds us of all the things that we've been talking about. So they talk about first part is share attention. So showing a really genuine interest in what a young child's focused on, making that connection, building that relationship, letting them know that they're valued and you want to spend time with them, getting down to their level, looking at them, tuning into them, looking at their body language, not just what they're saying, and sensitively joining in with children's play. So that's the first step of it if we're wanting to develop those really high quality interactions. The second part is about how we respond to the child once we've established that engagement. And we've seen some fantastic examples of those in these videos about that really sensitive support, about taking the child from where they are, about not coming in with your own agenda as part of that, but having that really good knowledge of child development, which lets you take the child forward from the point at which they are, about responding to what the child's saying and what the child's communicating, and really being aware of your own body language as well as the body language of the child, and showing that interest. So you might comment about what the child can see or hear or provide a commentary as part of that, but you're really following the child's lead and responding to their non-verbal and their verbal communications. That's the first two stages, so the sh and the part of it, and then expanding, trying to get to that back and forth rally of engagement. So once you get to that point where you're having that to and fro in terms of that conversation, the adult and child are sharing that attention together, and the adults are actively responding to the child's need or responsively following the child. And this is the point, once we've got this, once we've established that dialogue and that relationship between the adult and the child at this particular moment in time, that's when the modelling and the scaffolding can start to take the learning and the experience beyond what the child already knows. So the example that they give here is a child might give a one-word response such as a dog, and the adult can expand on that by repeating and building on that and by adding a few more words. So maybe putting it into a sentence to say here, yes, it's a dog, or yes, it's a big, small brown dog as part of that. So using your knowledge to help expand that. And we saw it in the first one about when we were talking about the Brussels sprouts. We've seen it in all of the videos, I think, as we've gone through, where the adults helped. We saw it a lot in the egg rolling one, but where the adults taking that, expanding on what the child's saying, providing that language for the child as part of those interactions going through, and modelling that appropriate use of language within those interactions. And then getting into that deeper conversation, really getting into those extended back and forward interactions, and giving the child the time to listen, to process and reply. So not jumping in straight away. One of the things I think we've seen on some of those videos is that it's absolutely fine to have silence sometimes, and give children thinking time and processing time as part of that. And then you can gently start to prompt or remind or scaffold, but give that child time first. Thinking about those open-ended questions and how we manage to build those in, and supporting children to develop those conversational skills, and taking it from that concrete, that practical, what they know, what they've been doing, those experiences that they already have, their current and past experiences, and really starting then to shape the conversation to move children into more abstract topics that are further away from the here and now. So do have a look at that. It is really interesting. There's a lot more information that goes around it, but it can be a really helpful model to start to develop a bit more in terms of your thinking. So I would say that in summary, it's really important that we think about how we plan the staffing, the routines, the environment to enable really high quality interactions to take place. They can't be a bolt-on. They need to be a really integral part of your provision. And it's about having that engaging and enabling indoor and outdoor environment that supports interaction. About thinking about those everyday routines and how we build in those excellent opportunities for interaction. How do we build those personal relationships with children? And how do we really get to know those children? About thinking about the deployment of adults and making sure that we have the time, but also that we value an adult sitting one-to-one with a child, or working with 2 or 3 children as part of that. And how do we try to make sure that children get opportunities for those one-to-one interactions with adults, as well as those larger group or whole class interactions? About really planning for vocabulary, about thinking about the vocabulary that we want children to learn, and that progression of vocabulary that we would have through on the journey that children have with us in EYFS. Planning for that vocabulary and using it, but also picking up on that incidental vocabulary, that vocabulary from within a story, for example, and making sure that we use that with children. Giving children those opportunities to understand that words have different meanings in different contexts, and to play with and explore that language and that vocabulary as part of that. About not forgetting the importance of non-verbal interaction. And that comes down to, I think, and that really builds upon the importance, and what's key, I think, is knowing and valuing each child as an individual. Relationships really matter, and what we need to teach children and model to children is the real importance of respectful relationships, and from those respectful relationships and that joy of being with children, I think, is when the highest quality interactions come. We've reached the end of what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for spending the time. One last thing I want you to do before you go is just to have a think about your next steps and write them down. It might just be one thing. What one thing am I going to do differently? What one thing am I going to find some more about? What one thing might I be changing during in terms of my practice? How might I do something differently? Or you might be thinking about a particular child. You might have been watching some of these videos. You might have been thinking, oh, that's just like, what could I do for that child? So, 1, 2, 3, not more than that. Think about your next steps. Make a note about them. One of the things that I always do is I put a note in my, I think about the next steps, but I put a note in my diary, maybe for 3 weeks' time. Did I actually do it? Did I follow up on it? What was the impact in terms of that? Thank you for your time today. We've reached the end. The PowerPoint will be available for you. And as we said, you can access the Siren Films videos as well. There are some wonderful videos that go from birth onwards, and there are some fantastic resources to share with parents as well. Thank you very much for your time.